What I believe is that all kids can learn math and reading and writing, but we need to unlock how kids learn. We need to look at learning differently and think of the whole approach to learning, because there's not just the cognitive factors, but there's the social factors and the mental health and the social emotional factors impact learning. So kind of now actually putting all of the things together, but I'm not just doing work in math and or STEM. I'm very curious about reading and dyslexia and visual spatial thinking and all of the unique ways brains are wired, and how can we leverage the way brains are wired to teach kids anything they want to know and learn and be good at.
In most cases, I would make the argument that Canada is a leader ahead of the United States in most areas around education in terms of progressive pedagogy, focus on kids beyond tests, and in innovation in general. That said, the US has probably done a better job in promoting and advocating for STEM education. Here in Canada, without question, the pioneer in that field for Canadian educators has been Dr. Gina Cherkowski. And so today I'm pleased to be able to share a conversation with Gina and her passion, not only with STEM, but also shifting more broadly to things like social and emotional learning and just social justice in general. She has a true heart for doing what's best for kids. And so if that means we're going to help you with finding something in the area of STEM, whether that means we want to help you with becoming a more well-rounded and self-regulated human, we'll do that as well. So I really appreciate Gina's true, authentic passion for children. And I think that comes out very clearly in our conversation. So I hope you enjoy today's discussion and conversation with Dr. Gina Cherkowski. Gina, you're a hard woman to track down, not in terms of finding you, but finding all of the things you've done. And I'll just sort of share with you my appreciation for you and kind of where our paths have crossed. You were certainly, I think at one time I would have thought of as, the STEM leader in Canada. That was kind of your bread and butter. And it was maybe before STEM was even as popular as it has become. So you definitely were ahead of the curve and sort of leading a lot of ways. And I also felt that even though you're based in Alberta and you have lots of roots there, you were a bit more of a Canadian voice of STEM, which is part of this podcast, is breaking down some of those siloed provincial barriers that exist, because that's the way our education system works. And so you were one of those people that were working in multiple provinces and places across Canada in STEM. And now you've more recently morphed. I don't even want to, you can tell me more about it, transitioned, added a curiosity in and around social and emotional learning. And so why don't you just begin by just sharing a little bit of your journey of how you got to where you are today in education?
Will do. Yeah, it's kind of a non-traditional journey, but I think it all fits together nicely. I used to be a math teacher, and inside the math classroom, you certainly see a lot of students who sort of self-identify as not being a math brain and or even calling themselves quote unquote stupid. I had an entire class that called themselves the stupid class. And I really wanted to dig into that. So I actually started my journey, went back to school, did my master's looking at sort of neurodiversity and risk factors, students at risk in particular with math, did a lot of work in that area. But I also wanted to look at other factors that impact student learning. So I actually ended up taking a double cognate in math education, but also in culture studies and education, looking at social, emotional, and cultural barriers that can impact student learning, all based on like identity, belonging, those kinds of things that happen in a classroom that either help students engage or keep them from engaging inside the class. So it wasn't just about the math and the concepts behind like what I need to know and what are the barriers of learning, the learning science part, but I wanted all of the factors that might be influencing why students don't get to know or are struggling. And that led me down the whole STEM chain, because I saw STEM as a hands-on way we could teach ideas like mathematical concepts or ideas to kids who were more tactile or hands-on or needed context, needed the story or the why behind it. I think I was very lucky because I had a mom who was a special educator And my dad, that's what we called it back then. And my dad was a math teacher. So I kind of got the best of both worlds. My mom was always talking about neurons firing and all kinds of ways of doing things. And my dad, when I didn't understand something, would show me another way to do it at home that often had the context that I was missing inside the classroom. Like he could make the pictures or relate it to something in the real world. And I put all of that together and really started to look at the social emotional journey or the mental health journey that impacts student learning math. I found out that, having a math learning disability that's diagnosed is actually tied to having more adult prescriptions and anxiety and depression into adulthood. And I looked at all of the implications of changing a trajectory of a child's life based on early learning, whether it's math and or reading or writing, and delved into neurodiversity, worked for, as a learning strategist, helping support neurodiverse learners, and it really all fits together. What I believe is that all kids can learn math and reading and writing, but we need to unlock how kids learn. We need to look at learning differently and think of the whole approach to learning, because there's not just the cognitive factors, but there's the social factors and the mental health and the social emotional factors and that impact learning. So kind of now actually putting all of the things together, but I'm not just doing work in math and or STEM. I'm very curious about reading and dyslexia and visual spatial thinking and all of the unique ways brains are wired, and how can we leverage the way brains are wired to teach kids anything they want to know and learn and be good at.
I think we're seeing this more just in everything, is the whole idea of somebody wanting to talk about STEM in isolation, SEL in isolation. None of this stuff
Yeah.
is in isolation. It just doesn't, learning isn't like that. And I think we are all fighting an institution that has tried to put learning in silos, right? Now we're learning English and now we're learning science. And it's like, that's not how people actually do learn and work and think. Now you look back and think, well, it seems obvious, and yet it's a struggle, because then people speak about their own anxieties around math and their difficulties around math. And so, these are things that linger, and so we have to fight that to try to help people understand. When you think about, your work in this area, like, is there something you can look back on and all of the projects you've been involved in, like something that really makes you proud to say, like, yeah, we did some really good work in this area and I was really proud to be part of that. So what do you look back on and think about as being a real highlight, a success story in your own journey?
Well, I think one of the things you mentioned, which was I became sort of known for STEM, and not just in Canada, like I traveled internationally and talked about STEM. I think that was really interesting for me. I ended up doing a lot of my graduate work in the US. When I moved back to Canada, I started using the acronym STEM, and everyone was like, so you're now doing stem cell work? And I was like, no, STEM is this acronym. And I realized that we didn't have it in our vocabulary on a regular basis up here, and people were asking what it was. So I thought, well, let's share what, STEM education is and the opportunity that I think it could provide. Because to me, the opportunity was for kids who need to learn math or access learning in a different way. They could have, like I said, hands-on, tangible, fun, challenge-based activities that leverage technology and get them engaged in learning something that they might have thought was difficult or hard or was inaccessible for them. So I was really happy to sort of help us learn and understand what STEM is. It has changed and morphed, and it turned into STEAM and innovation,
Right.
but all of that is really exciting stuff, I think. So that was exciting to be a part of, but I definitely feel like the work that I'm involved in today is the thing I'm probably most proud of. I just think you can't learn well without being well, and mental health of kiddos and teachers and everyone involved in education and providing support for parents and families, it's all super important. And really helping people understand that all brains are actually neurodiverse, but students who learn uniquely might need something different, but that doesn't equate to intelligence. It just means they need information differently, and they're probably going to process and output it differently. And what a world it could be if we had that opportunity for all kids to learn how they need to and share what they need to in ways that make sense to them and the way they're wired.
Well, and the whole SEL conversation, that it is for everybody, whether you're a very loved and well-adjusted young person, which is great
Mhm.
if you have that, and there are kids who need, there's still the need for social and emotional learning and skill and development is still there, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
those are things that we, even as adults, we think about the ways that we interact with our colleagues or the ways in which we take in information, feedback, or whatever, the degree to which we're self aware. All these things are lifelong skills and dispositions that we hope we consider all the time. And it's not something that ends at any point. Maybe just share, you have so many avenues and ways in which you're supporting SEL. Can you maybe talk a little bit about some of the organizations that you're involved with and some of the
Sure.
opportunities that exist? Because part of what I want to be able to do on this podcast is share ways in which people can grow their own learning and connect to you.
Absolutely. So I'm very excited. I'm the director of research and development at Headwater Learning Foundation. We're an organization that our mission really is transforming and bettering education and sharing best practice and doing research. We're just starting to look at what kind of assets we can create to support neurodiverse learners and or mental health, like social emotional learning in schools. I work with Calgary Academy. They got a grant that I was a part of helping create. It's a 2-year grant with the government of Alberta. And we're so excited about that because I had suggested let's put in a wellness coach, a coordinator who could help teachers implement a wellness program that is a social emotional learning based program that supports kids, but also supports teachers. And in year 2, we're going to also support parents and families because a systems approach to creating a culture of wellness is what's needed. So, so that there's fluidity among all the environments that a kid lives and belongs in, and that we're all using the same tools, resources, and strategies to support social emotional learning, both for the adults and for the kiddos. And really all comes down to the work that Kim Schonert-Reichel did, where she showed contagion of stress, and I loved that work. So we're using MindUp as one of the programs that we're studying, but we're also developing some of our own tools to help support parents and families. And so that is an interesting project. We're also starting a Canadian Mental Health in Schools Summit. That I'm really excited about that. That's going to be May 17th and 18th, 2024. And in 2025, I think it's moving to April, and it's moving from Calgary in year 1 to Banff in year 2. And we're talking about moving it around the country because the whole goal is to get folks engaged in all of the capacities they may be a stakeholder in working with kids, engaged in the conversations and helping us share resources, like you said, and see solutions and come together as a community that can support wellness and well-being. And so I'm so excited about that. Tickets are going on sale in January. It's going to be at the Telespark Science Center in Calgary. And I think there's going to be resources for parents because we're doing a free parent and community night that's attached to the conference. The conference is mostly for teachers or psychologists or educational leaders, superintendents, people like that, like the education stakeholders and or mental health stakeholders. But I'm really, really excited about that. We're bringing a bunch of sort of different voices together. Even though we're talking about it in schools, we're going to have different voices coming to the table. Dr. Jean Clinton, who wrote the book Love Builds Brains, is coming. We've got Gurdeep from the Yukon who dances and spreads joy, but he's got important elements in his message too about, connection and bullying and kindness and the optimism and joy, of course. So I'm really excited about that. The research we're sharing, we just actually shared it down at the Castle Conference in Atlanta, Georgia at the Social Emotional Learning Exchange. 2 of my colleagues that I work with, shout out to Dylan Dean and Dimitra Mylonis. I co-presented with Dylan and Dimitra presented her work. And that's, sharing it on an academic stage. We're also going to the International Congress on School Effectiveness and Improvement in Dublin to share our work. Again, it's the multi-stakeholder stuff, including all the stakeholders that may be involved in supporting kiddos' learning. But my big thing is, I had a plan to continue my work in math education and support kids. I've always been a social justice advocate, so I always look at who is not learning and what can we do to change that and remove barriers. the biggest thing we could do, I think, what's hit me in the face is we need to be well before we learn well, and we're
Yeah.
not in that place of being well. So those are just a few ways that we're working, but we're also collaborating with Dr. Sharon Friesen and Dr. Jennifer Turner from the University of Calgary, who are creating a mental health framework for schools in the province of Alberta, and we get to do a little bit of support and advisement on that. We're just sharing our learning about what does a wellness coordinator do and how they support teachers and kids and implementing a program. And anyone can contact me if they're curious or want to know more. I just finished getting off the phone with the Canadian Mental Health Association in Kelowna about potentially sharing research and maybe even looking at what they're doing and how can we connect with them and share our learnings and they can share theirs, and would there be opportunities to collaborate? So we're very open-minded and very it's so important to collaborate. We can't do this work alone, and it's such important work. So we've got a few things we're doing, but we're not doing them on our own.
Yeah, it sounds like lots of emerging things. When you talked about sharing at a conference recently, if you could just pull out one bit of research that either kind of surprised you or just hit you maybe in a way that was like, wow, this is really telling. And because again, the way you're describing your journey sounds like, you're seeing something with different set of eyes, right? And so part of that often comes from you read something, you saw a bit of research that just said, my goodness, this is that we got to be doing better here. So is there something that you'd share specifically around your research journey?
Well, really startling new research is a 50% increase in hospitalizations due to suicidal ideation for teens. And I believe that was a 2021 research study. So if we look at what kids are needing, they need us in different ways. And, I go back to my own experience as a teacher. I remember working with a student who, they were new to the school. I was trying to get them engaged in math. And then I really realized they needed human connection. And so my work with them was more about what's going on in your life and how are you doing? And suddenly I remember when I was absent, I went to a conference, I came back, and you didn't think he'd made that connection, but I took the emphasis away from just the math to be more holistic and human-centric. And, I got the nicest little message about being away for a day and how important I was in their world and how much they needed me. And I think that's what I see when I'm going to these conferences and I'm hearing the 50% increase in suicidal ideation, but I also see it in the burnout rates and the dropout rates of teachers in the profession itself. Kids' needs are increasingly complex, both the neurodiversity and the mental health, and that's impacting the people who love and care for them and are educating them. And so taking care of our teachers and our kids is so critical right now. The dropout rates is the other thing that really startled me, and the support that teachers need. So those are a few of the things in my mind is if we have students, contemplating their lives they're so young and there's so much that we can do to support them. And there's a difference between a really good conversation I had with the CMHA, Mike Gullick in Kelowna. There's a difference between mental health and being actually somebody who has a diagnosis and preventative mental health and wellness. So if we can be on the preventative side, that's really important because there's a lot we can do at an early stage. So early intervention is absolutely key. And I think learning, you've got to be well to learn well, but also it's the same. When you feel like you're not learning, that affects your self-esteem and who you are.
That's right.
Like you said, I hear from adults all the time. There's stories about how they feel inadequate because of how math made them feel when they were kids. I hear that on a regular basis. They carry it forever. So small or large, people are struggling.
Well, and it makes me think, on the one hand, some of this research is revealing, when you talked about shifting your own emphasis to a child from let's talk about math to let's talk about you. I think great and caring teachers have been doing that from time immemorial. But they haven't always done it as intentionally and as focused as they need to in the light of some of the research that you're finding. I think that's true in many cases. There are practices that you don't have to learn necessarily something new. It's just implementing something important and understanding the impact that it has. I tell this story often because it struck me as so simple and yet so powerful. So I was in Singapore a number of years ago, and I was visiting a school, and I walked into this English classroom in high school, and kind of the lights were off, and it was just very calm in there. And what
Mhm.
the teacher did every class was, it was actually a math class, started with tea. They had tea at
Wow.
5 minutes before, and they just came in and it was calm and they're quiet. Sometimes they visited with the teacher, sometimes they just sat. It was a late class in the day, and they'd come from, I don't know if they were in phys ed, or it was like just the hecticness of the day. And he just said, I
Mhm.
just wanted to create a space for them just to sort of breathe. And again, it's such a simple, and I don't know that he completely understood. Like, I tried to tell him, like, this is amazing. The
Yeah.
fact that you've just dedicated this time. And then, as you say, it leads into better learning because these kids are in a better positions. We've seen people incorporate physical activity and all kinds of other s- very wellness centric ideas that probably in in cases got pushed back and said, oh, like, you're taking it, like, we only have a 50-minute period and you're taking 10 minutes to do whatever.
Mhm.
I think many of those teachers didn't have the backing or even the way to articulate the fact that they understood this is really important, but I don't really know that I have. So what the work that you're doing in many cases gives license to practices that we know and teachers are doing, and letting them know, like, keep doing that and do more of that. And here's why that's effective. So I think that's such a big part of all of this work, is just to help people understand that, just shifting your intention and shifting your lens just a little bit can make
Mhm.
all the difference in the world to a kid who is struggling and just needs to know that there's an adult in the world that cares about them and is looking beyond their test scores or their
Mhm.
grades, but sees them as a human being. Which, you say that out loud and you think, well, that seems obvious, and maybe, but I don't know that it is always as obvious as it might seem.
Yeah, I mean, teachers get in the game because we love kids. That's why we do what we do. And there's all kinds of reasons, like the increased complexity of today's learner and the increased needs kids have, especially with the last few years of uncertainty going on. It brings us back to those things that we naturally do, which is care for humans, because that's what
Hmm.
teachers do. But some of the science behind it, which I didn't even really realize. So, for example, diaphragmatic breathing, like I've heard breathe in and out and it can help calm your nervous system, but understanding the science behind why we need to take 3 brain breaks a day. And it's a
Hmm.
small thing to do, less than a minute, 3 times a day. And it's actually tied to greater mathematical outcomes and performance
Interesting. Yeah.
because it's tied to better pro-social engagement. You're more connected. You're calmer. Your working memories increase because your anxiety is decreased, and you're ready and able to like this. There's so much behind it, but
Yeah.
I didn't really realize the depth of science behind the simple things in our rushed
Hmm.
world that's increasingly
Hmm.
complex and uncertain. How just the breathing and taking time to really not just see students, because they need to feel seen. That's the thing. Um, and teachers, we obviously are in it, like I said, because we care so much about kids and their outcomes. They need to feel it in the way that it makes sense to them too. So
Oh,
sometimes they
that's
attach themselves to the number that on the test. That's not necessarily our message to them, but that might be how they interpret it.
This episode is brought to you by Advanced Learning Partnerships, also known as ALP. We are a professional learning consulting group that serves communities across North America. We are partners, designers, and agents for change. You can learn more about the work we do at alplearn.com. And now back to the show. Then the other part of all of this is the challenge facing teachers, in that it's an isolated profession. You can spend all day in your classroom by yourself, and so the lack of opportunity to reflect, interact with other colleagues makes a lot of these kinds of simple things difficult to implement because you get locked in your own world. They need opportunities to just reflect. I think is always such a challenge. You go from 9 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon, and then you're planning, and then, like, when do you actually get a time to process and think, like, how am I helping my students be well and feel well in my classroom? It's just one of those things that gets left behind, and they're not
Yeah.
trying to be to do that. It's just the nature of their work. So people like you can come in and help them just reprogram a little bit of their approaches. Unlike other professions where you have more time to collaborate and interact, teaching is just one of those where that doesn't happen as often as it needs to, and we wish it could. So
Yeah, teachers are always on the run, like, right? We're always busy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just that way. Given we're our show about leadership, I want to talk a little bit specifically about you and leadership. I'm always interested in leadership challenges that you face. What leadership challenges might you kind of look back and say, that was kind of a challenge and you overcame it, or how you processed that? I'd love to hear just a challenge that you faced in the past.
So, well, I think talking about STEM and trying to move an initiative with STEM without everybody having a common understanding, that was problematic. And there was a lot of pressure that was, based on the US version of what STEM is and was and could mean. And it's tied to money and so many different things that I thought, well, maybe I wonder if we could create our own kind of version or vision of what STEM education could be and look at it as an opportunity for all kinds of brains and learning. So before I could do the work, I realized I needed to stop and get everybody engaged in the conversation and come to sort of a consensus, a bit at least, or have an understanding that people were willing to say, yep, okay, that's STEM education in Canada, and now let's move this initiative forward. So that big challenge was lack of a common vision. I think that would be something that I would say is a constant leadership problem or challenge.
Yes.
Because when you're working with lots of organizations and you're trying to bring them together, there's oftentimes that how are we all connected? What's our thread? What's our personal mission vision? And if we're collaborating with other entities and organizations, how do we have a common understanding, but then also reach a common vision that I think is so important, because you can reach more people if you work together and are collaborative than if you are independent and on your own. So how do you design collective vision? So one of the new things I'm into is systems thinking, and how do you take complexity and complex systems and create that succinct vision between different entities that want to work together for the same sort of big mission and vision.
That's
still there.
Yeah, no, that whole challenge of common language and building literacy together, because I think even something like STEM now, when you ask people what it is, it gets a really, really wide range of responses, which isn't always a bad thing. I mean, it's nice to be able to consider lots of perspectives, but in a system, whether it's a school or district or other organization, you need to be able to, when you use language, you need to know that you mean it in the same way and that there isn't this disparity of, definitions that exist. That's something that I go to right away is, if we're going to launch this thing, let's spend time together making sure we understand things in a similar way. That doesn't mean that there can't be diverse opinions and viewpoints and perspectives. That's absolutely part of it. But we need to speak the same language, at least to start with. And so that's one that never ends. My early years in especially educational technology jumped way ahead of people, because I had the luxury and the time of looking at things and understanding things. And so I wanted to start, way ahead of things when people are going like, wait a minute, we don't even know what you're talking about. Like, okay, so let's just level set here so that we can do the other. That was certainly, definitely a mistake or a learning that I had. But I think about women leadership as always being, an interesting conversation to have. If you were talking to a young woman, a 25-year-old woman who's thinking about leadership, but I don't know, maybe is intimidated or not sure that that's her thing or whatever, what kind of advice would you give to her, given your experience, that you might share with her in terms of like, here's what you should do or think about if you're considering a career in leadership and education?
I definitely think there can be a lot of allies. And so looking for those people who will champion and support you. And they may also have leadership visions, or they may already be a leader, but people will help others. And I certainly know that was the case for me. It's okay to be asking for help and for mentorship and for people to help coach you. That's critical. I mean, I have an amazing coach even still right now, and he's amazing. He talks about not just glass ceiling and breaking above that, but to create a glass floor for yourself. So because we all don't stay at the top, and you have different trajectories in your career, but how do you create a safety network below you so that that there's those kinds of things to consider too, is how do you how do you have a safety network? And I think that's the people around you. And again, those are the people that will help you rise to the top. I also think I had 2 older brothers growing up, and they were, 2 and 4 years older than me. So they could run faster and throw harder, and just everything they could do was just better. And so I just had this tenacious desire to play as well, to be in
Yeah.
the game, or to do things that I saw other people doing. And I would just say, if you see something you want to do, don't make your own belief be a barrier. Think of the freedom of how could you do it. And there's always going to be obstacles and barriers for you to get wherever you want to go. So they are going to come. It's about how you get up. And I love that story about being the man in the arena. I was super scared, actually, to talk about STEM and be a voice and stand in the rink, because I read Brene Brown. I heard her TED Talk, how she was criticized for how she looked and all these things. And I'm like, scary. But I also, took heart in the message was just be brave and go do it. So I think be brave and go do it, and find the people who will champion you, because there'll be a lot that won't, but there will be a lot that will.
Oh, that's great advice. And I mean, I wholeheartedly agree. And I've been blessed and grateful to have so many people in my life who I view as colleagues, I view as mentors, I view as people that I look up to, and they're out there. And some people are very fortunate to have them in close proximity. And sometimes you have to look outside of your own little circle to find those people. But we live in a world today where that's possible. You can find people who might share a similar passion to you and are maybe a number of steps ahead of you in that journey. And the one thing I know about educators is they are, generally speaking, a pretty giving, generous community. And so great advice. Question that I'm adding for my 2024 season is it a chance for you to give a little gift, to give a shout out to somebody who you're grateful? You kind of alluded to it just in this previous answer, and maybe not part of that. I don't know, but who would you like to give a shout out to say, this is a person that's I'm really grateful for in my life in terms of your professional career?
Wow. It's honestly hard to narrow it down to just one.
I'm sure it is. That's why I asked it, because I know it's hard. I know people are like, oh, if I say this person, then this person might miss out, but that's okay. Just one that you're thinking of today.
You know what? I'm going to say Jim Gray, the gentleman who founded Calgary Academy, which is a school for neurodiverse learners. He's also the founder of Headwater Learning Foundation, and he wants the best practices learned at the school to be accessible to all. He is an absolute inspiration. He thinks outside the box, and he's empowering me to help shape and change education. And I have a visionary boss as well, Dr. Greg Bass, and he empowers my boss. And I just feel very privileged to. And by the way, Jim's 90, and he's one of the hardest working people I know. I remember saying that I'm really excited about this work, and I'm kind of maybe thinking that I'd retire in 10 years. And he's like, why would you retire? Like, I'm 90, I'm still. So I thought, no, you're right. Like, lifelong learning, lifelong doing.
Sure.
But he is still at contributing in education and in so many other ways, just a good human. So he's a hero too. I've been lucky that I'm in one of his organizations.
Awesome. Well, that's great. Perfect. All right. So to wrap up, you want to share something that you're reading or you're listening to?
Yeah, I listen to Smartless. It became the podcast that I'm sometimes listening to when I have longer road trips, and I find myself laughing out loud.
They're good.
Some of the funny.
Did you watch the documentary on them?
Not yet, but I have it earmarked to watch over the holiday. Yeah.
Yeah, my wife and I watched that one about a month ago. It was good. Very good.
Oh, good.
Anything that you're watching, guilty pleasure or not?
Yeah, well, you know what? I'm Married at First Sight, and I watched The Golden Bachelor. Yeah, so guilty pleasure.
Okay, yeah. Hey, amazing how many people reference reality TV. And, I remember reality TV can get a bad name. I think people are more accepting the fact that it ranges and it's always just this sort of insight in the, the human psychology and the societal trends. So that's all right. And finally, visitors to the Calgary. Are you right in the city?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. So what is a lesser known place that folks should check out in the community? It may not be like everybody's going to say Banff for those kind of things, but what's the place that you say, hey, if you're in Calgary, you might not think of it, but check out blank.
Oh, that's a good one. There's a lot of really interesting things. Like, we had the Olympics here, so obviously some of the ski jumps and some of the sporting facilities around the Olympics is pretty spectacular. But I think I would go down to the walking paths along the river, which I think are amazing, and our green spaces I think is pretty spectacular. And we also have a lot of art. So when if you're walking downtown and you walk by the river, you're going to see really unique, like the Peace Bridge and other things like that. So I would say take time to go outside and walk around, especially down by the river and downtown, which is pretty amazing.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Gina, for your time today. I appreciate you. It was great catching up, learning about the good work you're doing. I wish you all the best success with that. And I hope our paths cross maybe in person one of these days soon as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope so too. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on the show. I'm super excited about it. I love what you do.
Thank you.